So welcome everyone to another SGA meetup on the topic of AI and games, sustainability challenges and opportunities. Um, I'll just run you through the agenda really quickly, and then we'll try and get into it nice and quick. I'm going to start by talking about whether or not we can align AI with sustainability goals. So I did a research project in December for the Deakin University um, Digital Life Lab, where I read a bunch of reports on AI sustainability and tried to summarize it for them. And I'm just going to present basically the findings of that and how I see the implications for the games industry. And then I'm going to hand over to Chloé Germaine from the University of Manchester, who has also done a similar sort of research lit review looking at the current uses of AI in games. And yeah, together I think we'll talk about like what we can do to minimize the impacts and maximize the upside. So we'll try and keep it nice and short so we have time for discussion and questions. Um, yeah, we'll dive in. If this is your first time joining an SGA event, allow me to kind of introduce ourselves. We are the Sustainable Games Alliance. We're a non-profit member-owned cooperative run by and for the games industry. The SGA produces and maintains an open source methodology for calculating the greenhouse gas emissions of games, and so we can kind of measure and reduce them. And this is informed by our members and their actual development expertise, as well as scientific best practices. We're also building a network of sustainability professionals and sustainability-minded developers to disseminate knowledge, simplify the process of reporting and compliance, and just accelerate the transition to a greener games industry. We are backed by a number of big names. David Helgeson is a supporter, founder of Unity, Petri Javaletto, co-founder of Remedy, and we have a scientific advisory board keeping us honest as well. Our team is small but mighty. My name is Dr. Ben Abraham. My background is in academia, but I left several years ago and have been a consultant. I wrote the book Digital Games After Climate Change, which was the first attempt to put some concrete numbers on different parts of the games industry and its greenhouse gas emissions. Maria Wagner is our managing director. She's also here in the meeting with us. Her background is in the Berlin and Brandenburg Games Association and was a co-founder of the Games Forest Club. And Jiri Kupainen, who is the chairperson of the board. Many of you will probably know him. He's an industry veteran, spent 20 plus years in the games industry. Yeah. And these are some of our other people involved. The SGA is a small but growing organization. We have about 30, I think, plus members. We're growing every week. Members like Cybo, Colossal Order, Sports Interactive, Fingersoft, Remedy, the EGDF, games associations, and game developers. Critically, we are owned and controlled by the games industry. Our members decide what we work on, what we do, give us direction for yeah, how we should best operate. So I wanted to lay a few things out before getting into the meat of my talk. I wanted to sort of lay my cards out on the table. The first thing this talk is about being anti-AI. I know there's some very strong sentiment out there at the moment. There's very pro and anti sentiments about AI, and both can be a bit dogmatic. This is not a talk about being anti-AI. This is really about being responsible with AI, figuring out what it's useful for, how we actually apply it in meaningful ways, and minimize the downsides. Unfortunately, this talk is about the fact that AI is having a real impact on greenhouse gas emissions globally. The extent is a little bit uncertain, but we do know for a fact that it's heading in the wrong direction. And that's a challenge. So that's the kind of context that we're operating in. And I also believe that we can use AI better and worse ways. So there are ways we can deploy it that have a minimum impact, that make a maximum benefit. And there are ways where we can just waste energy, waste time, waste money. And so we're all about trying to explain that for you today. So, what do we know about the impact of AI? A big part of it comes from the International Energy Agency's Energy and AI report, which was released in April last year. This was a massive landmark report into the topic. They brought together all the global experts. They gathered all the data they could, massive, massive undertaking, really, really comprehensive synthesis of all the research up to that point. And from that, they developed a number of scenarios for the near future. So the first one is a base case adoption of AI, which they only project out to 2030. And you can see a couple of the trend lines in the graph on the right. A liftoff case where AI takes up high adoption, it provides lots of benefits, people start using it. A high efficiency case where the improvements in hardware and energy efficiency of the actual AI itself improves and what that looks like. And a headwinds case where the AI bottlenecks that might prevent some of the more exuberant scenarios from happening, things like lacking energy, right? Like we're seeing bottlenecks in terms of delivering the amount of energy that some data centers need. So none of these are predictions. These are just scenarios, potential applications of what the trends and the data is kind of showing. And a key point to emphasize here is that conventional data centers and what the IEA calls accelerated data centers, which are what we think of as, those are the data centers filled with GPUs to run AI and machine learning algorithms. They're hard to disentangle. There's not a ton of data anymore saying, okay, this is an AI data center, this is a conventional data center. And Google has even said from 2022, the distinction they don't think is meaningful anymore, which, yeah, we can agree or disagree on, I think. But two graphs I want to draw your attention to. The top one is the past capacity of data centers in terms of energy consumption or electricity consumption. So this is the trend that data centers have been on from 2005 to 2024, and you can see this big upwards curve. So that trajectory of energy consumption is increasing. And the bottom graph is the projections of the near future. This is the different IEA base case, liftoff, headwinds, energy efficiency cases. And they've synthesized that from a bunch of different studies. Those are the gray lines kind of sitting behind the colored ones. So I think this is a reasonable sense of like what the possibility is for the next 5 years, 5 to 10 years. In every single one of the scenarios that the IEA presents, energy demand and emissions from AI and data centers alike increase. And that's a challenge. That's a challenge for the planet. It's a challenge for us. It's a challenge for energy systems, a challenge for costs. Energy demand is unlikely to be met by 100% renewables. A lot of the expectation is that it will be met by natural gas, which means turbines, fossil fuel emissions, increasing planetary impact. How much is an open question. One researcher, De Vriesgouw, found that if you added up all of the delivered TDP, that's thermal design power values of the accelerated GPUs and AI chips that were delivered by NVIDIA and AMD, just to 2025, if they're still all in use and running at like a reasonable efficiency factor, they're in utilization, it can use more electricity than a country like Ireland. So already this is a big, substantial amount of energy that we're using, and the trends are only looking bigger. CapEx by Alphabet, you might have seen the news in the last week or so, is exploding. They are predicting now 175 to 185 billion dollars of CapEx. A big chunk of that is AI and data centers. And a report just this month came out from a data center analysis group called CleanView, which looked at all of 2025's data center projects and analyzed them and basically said a huge number of them are expecting to not connect to the energy grids. Instead, they're going to draw a lot of their power from on-site generation. And when you look at how they're going to generate that power, 75% of the equipment that's actually being delivered is gas, natural gas, which has emissions. So the IEA's conclusion is that Data centers is one of the few sectors of the global economy that's expected to grow in terms of emissions out to 2030. And that's in clear conflict with climate goals. We know that we are at a point in time where we need to be reducing global emissions, reducing them as quickly as possible in advanced economies so we make space for the development of the rest of the world. And this is kind of running counter to that. And this chart here just shows you, this is the IEA's projections for different sectors and different scenarios of how much CO2 they imagine or project data centers could be using over the next 5 years. And you can see space heating, buildings, industry, in a lot of ways, they're going down. They're moving in the right direction, but data centers are moving in the wrong direction. So drilling down, so that's the really big overarching trends, drilling down into the actual details of what we know about AI and how it's constructed and what sort of life cycle emissions it has. The best study we have is a Mistral study that looked at one large language model that was trained, and it looked at, you can see in the graph on the right hand side all of the stages of the life cycle, and where the bulk of impacts were. So training and inference was 85% of the greenhouse gas emissions, 91% of the water consumption of this model. Hardware was 61% of materials consumption. So together, the majority of impacts are at the manufacturing stage. It's making chips, making servers, the model training stage, designing this big large language model or whatever other AI tool it is, gathering all that data, analyzing all that data, uses a lot of energy, and then inference, actually using that tool to generate results. So how and where do we contribute to this, right? Because we want to know what we can actually do to reduce this impact. Well, Lucioni and Hernandez Garcia did a study in 2023 looking at a bunch of open source AI models and the footprint of each one. And they looked at a diverse set of them, from really, really small models to quite large ones, looking at, 95 different models. Information on commercial models is really quite lacking. So these are just open source ones. But the key insight here is you can kind of see the blue dots. That's models that are trained on renewable energy, used a lot or emitted a substantial amount less CO2 than ones trained on grids that are predominantly coal, oil, or gas. So that's one data point we can use. The second is cost. We can infer a bit about the energy involved in training. So it is a bit disappointing in the Mistral study. They included training and inference in the same step. If they'd broken that out, they could have told us a lot more, but I guess for commercial reasons they didn't. And so the cost of an AI model and training it is a good proxy for this. And so this is a chart here from a group called epoch.ai, and it just shows this is a logarithmic chart, so the exponential, or almost exponential, I guess is a upward trend anyway, of cost for frontier AI models. So this is things like the Gemini, this is GPT-4, this is DALL-E, the image generation one. And so this is a combination of hardware and energy, but energy is going to be a big part of it. So that tells us something too. So really, we need data transparency. That's the key lesson here, is at the moment, a lot of the commercial models are private. The data isn't available for us to know what's involved in making them and what we're, and for us to make then more informed choices about what tools we use. Google's Gemini study came out, I think, in earlier this year or late last year, and it was quite good. The first public account of an actually deployed frontier AI model. So this was a study of Google's Gemini. They looked at not just the server and data center energy costs, but also cooling overheads, all sorts of other kind of infrastructure costs too. And it expanded the boundaries of measurement. This is like kind of yeah, at the moment, the gold standard of measuring. And it found that the medium Gemini app's text prompt uses only 0.24 watt hours of energy, emits a really small amount of CO2, and consumes a small amount of water, which is great, except that we have millions and billions of queries of them. So this is obviously impact that adds up. We saw those big picture trends. So the key question here, I think, for us is this energy consumption? Is this emissions? Is this additional demand that we're adding? Are we creating this demand, or are we substituting other things with it? I mean, I think that's a question for us to keep in mind. We probably can't really answer it completely now, but I think that's going to be the key question to know what is a responsible use of AI in the future. Another really useful source is the Hugging Face AI leaderboard, which ranked open AI models on energy and CO2 for just looking at inference. So this is not the training, this is just how much energy does it use to answer a given query. And so this is really good. It's a really nice standardized test. They've got all the same hardware that they tested on. And yeah, this kind of points to a few things. It gives us some real insight. It's only data for open models though. So again, for like ChatGPT, for Google models, we again, a lot of this information is still missing. A key insight from this leaderboard, though, is that the most efficient models all end up being quite narrow in their focus, very well optimized, task-specific models. They're not the general do-everything models. They're not the GPTs. They're not, claiming to be all and do all and plug into absolutely every system. They are very specific things for like one, maybe two tasks. Maybe it's image identification, maybe it's text analysis. It's that sort of thing. Another key dimension that we can use to evaluate AI and its sustainability on is the parameters, the amount of parameters involved in a model. The IEA estimates that very small LLMs have very small amount of energy consumption per inference. Larger ones get up to much higher figures. So the more complex the model is, the more parameters it has, the more energy it's likely to use when we make inferences of it. So smaller models are trained on smaller data sets. They have shorter training runs that use less energy and emissions. And they also have the benefit of not relying on the most cutting edge hardware to run. They can kind of run on the good enough hardware that's been around, and that helps reduce that materials consumption element of impact too. So, some things we can ask ourselves to evaluate our use of AI when we're making a decision about adopting an AI tool. Number one is, do I need the Swiss Army knife AI, or will the task-specific model suffice? Does it need to do everything? Does it need to also generate text and also do images and also do video? Or is an image classification tool enough? I think we can also ask ourselves things like, does this actually improve our workflow? Does it add that new capability, or are we substituting? Are we replacing, a Google search, which used maybe like a tiny amount of energy, with some AI search, which is now using quite a bit more? We can ask ourselves, are there authorship risks, copyright risks as well? Was this model trained ethically? A benefit of the smaller models is that they often don't involve large data sets that have been copyrighted. So, yeah. So I think number one, the key lesson is fit the scope and scale of your tool to the task. Reduces the energy inference. That's the energy at inference time, at that runtime. Reduces the cost to you. It's going to be cheaper. And it reduces, I think, risk as well. Risk to your organization, risk for increasing costs as subsidies for these sort of AI tools start to be withdrawn, and the real true cost of the energy involved starts to be, become more apparent, and a potential risk to reputation. and it reduces training impacts, like I sort of mentioned. So, a couple of really quick examples before I finish up of good uses, I think, good uses of machine learning. So, Arc Raiders, smash hit, massive game. They used state-of-the-art methods to combine animation and reinforcement learning with physics-based control, and they taught their robots how to walk. So that's a really, really good use of AI. They did that in-house. There's a GDC talk coming up next month all about how they did it, and yeah, I think that'll be fascinating to watch. It's also discussed in their making of video. You can kind of have a look at that later too. But it adds a generally new capability. This is something that, it's very, very intrinsic to the game. It's essential to the experience, but it also took effort to actually integrate into the workflow. It wasn't just like a buy it off the shelf and, just plug and play and forget. Another comment to give you a little bit more context about how some other game studios are thinking about AI. So I saw this conversation just recently in a talk to investors from CD Projekt Red. An investor asked whether AI tools are being used in their game development process. Do you think it accelerates your work, or do you think it's just a gadget, curiosity? And the VP of Investor Relations said they're looking into it. They're doing some things, trialing off the shelf stuff, also trying to make their own tools. But basically, they think in our assessment, this is a quote, AI tools cannot replace human talent, particularly when it comes to narrative-rich games such as ours. So again, I think using the right tool for the right job is a key thing. And picking non-general AI models, task-specific models, have an entire order of magnitude lower impact, reduces training impacts, it's more likely to be ethically sourced data, reduces material demands, and there's even some evidence that fine-tuned models have, yeah, lower impacts because you're not like having to go back to it again to be like, oh, there's an error in this and fix it up. And I think the risk angle is a really important one. As the real true cost of the energy used in inference and training is starting to be known, I think we're seeing these price rises start to creep into AI tools. And I think there's a potential risk of getting locked into one tool, one workflow, and then being stung. There's also the risk to our corporate climate targets. At the moment, we don't have a whole lot of data, but we want it, we need it. And as the standards and expectations of customers become more sophisticated, they start to ask questions. They're going to want to know what an AI tool, what the real cost is behind it. And so the Green Software Foundation is currently working on a software carbon intensity for AI standard. They're going to submit that to the ISO in Q2. So imagine that will be coming down the pipeline and we will start to see some of this data. And so eventually, if you're using these tools, that data will be available and your stakeholders will probably expect you to be disclosing that as part of your corporate greenhouse gas footprint. And there's also the risk of gamers just really not liking AI as well. Again, I think we need to be careful about how we use it. Suda51 says they kind of feel off, and I kind of get that. One last data point to throw out there before I finish up is a Harvard Business Review report just came out, I think, this week about AI workflows intensifying the nature of work, actually leading to burnout, cognitive fatigue, and weak decision making by employees. So that's that's like a business sustainability risk. It's not a planetary one. But if all of your best talent are burning out because they're multitasking, they're trying to take on too much because they think they've got AI helpers, that could be a real problem. So yeah, general models, large training sets, potential risks, yeah, all that kind of stuff. So transparency, we need transparency. I invite you to join others in the Sustainable Games Alliance to make it clear that the games industry wants responsible AI. And to ask your tools vendors for either their carbon footprint or to use the software carbon intensity metric for AI and disclose it. And then the very last thing we can do is ask them, where are you getting your energy from? Are you using clean energy or are you running your own private turbine? So I might hand over to Chloe at this point and let her present her findings as well.
Thank you. Oh, see if I can share.
Okay.
Um, see if I can share that one. Oh, come on. See if I can do this.
Yeah, it should have given you permission.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, there we go.
Going to allow it. Um, can you see my slides there? Is that working for everybody?
You might want to hit the swap displays button because we're seeing the your presenter notes version.
Oh, okay, hang on. Is that better?
Yeah, there we go.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you. So, I've done a similar piece of work to Ben. I looked at over 50 studies on AI and sustainability, but and then also looked at the game industry's the current state of the art in the game industry in terms of how it's currently being used, attitudes, and various examples. So there's quite a long report, which I'm going to share some key takeaways, some of which Ben's already mentioned, some of those headlines, so I will skip over those. Okay, hopefully the slides are they're moving on. Yeah, I can't. Cool, Ben. Thank you. I can't see. Um, so the report, the point of this is to be a clear summary and of the sustainability implications of AI, followed again by some practical advice on how to make informed and strategic decisions that are appropriate for you. And again, like Ben, it's not intended to be this moral lecture or a persuasive piece. But I will be upfront about my own position. I do think that the sustainability and climate justice implications are not positive of AI, and I'm quite wary of industry hype. And there's a lot of pressure that we're all facing to adopt. I mean, I work in the education sector in higher education, and we're under a lot of pressure to adopt for use cases that have not been proven. And I know this is the same in the creative industries as well. So I'm not coming from a position of refusal, but a position of wariness, I guess. And the report is part of the Strategies Project, which is Sustainable Transition for Europe's Game Industries. Um, we're a European and UK funded project that wants to get good data for the games industry to help make those green choices. So it's an academic research piece. It sits slightly apart from the game industry, and it is trying to give you the best information that we have at the moment. Okay. So the current situation in terms of state of the art at the moment, we know that there is an increase in studios and individual developers using Gen AI tools. More studios than individual developers, according to the latest GDC data. We did see in the last in some surveys that were done of developers between 2024 and 2025, there was an increase in developers worrying about game quality as AI crept into more creative portions of their workflow. So it was up to 47% of developers who were worrying about the quality of games as a result of pressure to adopt AI in their workflows. So that was up 13%. And we know that there's a lot of pressure there to adopt. We see a lot of hype reporting around what it can do for your games um, online. There's enthusiasm amongst developers as well as wariness, enthusiasm for rapid prototyping, the experimentation possibilities, and in an IGDA Climate SIG report on AI, a kind of potential for AI tools to democratize in terms of access to skills and tools and development. So a kind of an idea that this might be exciting for new developers to kind of prototype their ideas and get access to the industry. At the same time, there's that wariness, there's concerns about job security, there's concerns about the quality of Gen AI in the resulting games, and we shall see that that's shared by some players as well. So it's mixed, I would say. So Ben has already given you some of the deep dive and the data in terms of the emissions side of AI. So I'll try not to repeat what he's said, but I'll go through some headlines that I think it's worth us knowing in terms of how they relate to game development. So we know that carbon emissions from large language models, transform models, Gen AI vary. They vary hugely, depending on how large the model is. But estimates suggest that it's a large footprint nonetheless. So you can take a figure from one of the reports, which was training an AI model might be equivalent to running 5 cars over their entire lifetime. That's not meant to be representative of all AI models, but it's just a kind of figure to give you a sense of like the order of magnitude compared to other computational processes. We know, as Ben said, general purpose models that promise to do everything for you, the kind of chat models, conversational models that will kind of want to be integrated into every part of your workflow, they consume more energy than small single purpose task specific models. We know that. We know that a lot of the tools being sold and being pushed for commercial use are large general purpose models rather than small ones, which tend to be made in-house or made for a particular research project or made for a particular use case. The sort of hype, the commercial hype, is around the big general purpose models, and we know that they have the largest costs. The consensus among the research on sustainability is that the image generation is the most computational intensive task and therefore the most emissions based task. So it's about 50 to 80 times more intensive to produce an image via AI than it is to get text back from AI. So that's something I think that's worth knowing as well. We know that inference emissions are growing. We know they've got these large training footprints, huge models with lots of parameters that have taken a lot of energy to train. But as adoption of these models increases, it's the inference where we're going to see the increase in energy consumption. There's a number of queries and prompts that are sent via these cloud-based models that you're going to start seeing a kind of cumulative, a kind of exponential rise in energy because of the inference. And we know that each query might be relatively small, but there's a cumulative, if you take a per query kind of energy measure in isolation, it doesn't seem that much. But when you consider the cumulative impact from repeated queries across millions of users, that's when we have a problem. I looked at one study that said that as companies chase performance targets for their big models, they're doubling their compute demand every 5 to 6 months at the moment. So you see it's a rapid growth in kind of energy need to keep these models growing and kind of chase the competitive nature of who's got the edge over who. And we know there's a growth, as Ben has showed in detail, about the emissions from data centers that is kind of behind the infrastructure behind these AI models. The biggest footprint is coming from the building of data centers. A recent report, this is why the need for kind of very clear governance and transparency is important. Just reading a report yesterday when I was revising all this material from the European Commission about energy data centers reporting on their clean energy use, and there's an awful lot of creative accounting going on in terms of people report energy data centers reporting clean energy use, but then you scratch away at the surface and actually a lot of that is offsets or it's certificates or it's not genuine clean energy use. And as Ben said, actually, we see now increasing turn to gas power to meet the demand of the new data centers. So we know that fossil fuels are playing a big role in data center expansion. But the key takeaway from all the 50 plus reports I read on this is a lack of transparency in AI provider disclosures. So we got the disclosure from the open models, we've got the disclosure from Hugging Face, that leaderboard, really useful, but not from the big commercial models. And there's not good comparable data or even shared methods in terms of the data in some cases. So it's hard to compare. So if you want to have a look at the numbers, There's a big list at the end of my report of all the papers that I looked at here. But this is the key thing, and this was posted by Dr. Sasha Luciedi on their LinkedIn feed just a few days ago. And it just underlines the problem that Ben and I are talking about, and that is the main issue of transparency. There's not enough information about what happens to our prompts when they get sent to whatever proprietary AI system we're interacting with. We don't have the information we need at the moment to make informed choices, and that's why we have to push for more accountability and environmental reporting. Now, my research also moved over into beyond carbon, into looking at the climate justice implications of AI models, particularly the large frontier models, the big commercial models. So we know that AI infrastructure consumes significant water and energy, and we know this creates pressures in regions facing climate stress, so typically South American countries. You may have seen a few weeks ago the Quilly.ai campaign, which is brought about by locals in Chile who've been fighting the creation of a $200 million data center campus that's severely impacting the region's water levels. And they asked people to send their prompts to them rather than to the Google AI model that's currently consuming all their water locally. And it was an idea of kind of to raise awareness about our kind of unthinking adoption of AI in everyday life. And sort of to think about the kind of the environmental and also human costs behind that. It's just one example of communities in the majority world who face disproportionate harms, including water depletion, e-waste and pollution, whilst we see profits accrue to the companies in the global north. And we know that AI is part of this big IT infrastructure that, it is dependent on extractive supply chains. We know it relies on labour in vulnerable regions. We know that the data labour behind AI systems is often low paid, very concentrated in the majority of the world. And it's critical for training those big AI models, those commercial models, and that we're currently kind of having marketed to us relentlessly. That there's precarious labour behind the training of those models in countries that are facing, the kind of front lines of climate change. So it is an us problem. So even if your studio is very small, AI tools rely on global infrastructures with clear justice implications. And if we want to use AI conscientiously, we have to understand that the tools have these hidden social costs. So it's not about blame, it's just about making informed, intentional choices about which tools support your creative goals. And the thing I kept coming back to, I started the report as a kind of cost benefit analysis originally, and I thought we can't do a cost benefit analysis, not when someone else is paying the costs. And I think that's the case with any big polluting or carbon intensive technology. The harm of those climate effects are generally felt elsewhere first. And it's the kind of thing that those CSRD reporting regulations, they capture a little bit of that, but they don't capture the full story of that. And I think it should be part of any sustainability conversation we're having. So there's commercial pressure mounting to adopt AI as the big frontier models and commercial AI companies want to seek a return on their massive investment that they've put into these big models. And we're seeing a few myths circulating around in terms of support for AI adoption. There were several industry authored papers I came across that made claims about the increasing efficiency of AI models and increasing efficiency of hardware that would offset the power consumption other researchers were warning about. One study that appeared in Nature claimed that AI emits less CO2 per page than a human doing the same work. So I dug into that. Very flawed study because it counted all of the human's daily emissions and only the inference emission of a single text prompt. So it's a really unfair comparison, but it was being put out there as this kind of scientific comparison. Hey, don't worry, you can use AI, it's better than using a person. And I think we're starting to see a little bit of that seeping through into reporting on AI, and we should be quite wary of it. Studies about AI efficiency are tending to exclude full life cycle impacts and therefore dramatically underestimating the footprint of the tools. And studies also seem to ignore the fact that a single prompt to an API almost never yields the results you need. We all know you have to send multiple prompts and revise to get the result you need from a big general model. And that means, it's never just one query, it's always multiple. We also see vague claims about productivity gains offsetting carbon costs, and I think we should be wary of that here as inference starts to outstrip training in terms of the energy consumption of AI models. It's not the case that using AI is going to get less energy intensive. It will grow as it's used more often. And research on a lot of the researchers in this area cite Jevons paradox, which just shows that any efficiency gains in any workflow increases total consumption rather than decreases. So the more efficient something gets, the more people use it, the more energy it consumes. And that's been the case right from the combustion engine in the 19th century through to present day AI use. It's just, that's what always happens. So we just need to kind of be wary of that when there are claims about efficiency kind of undercutting the costs of energy. Overall, the headline is energy demand from AI is growing. So lots of questions for us to ask about our AI use in our everyday lives, in our workflows, in our creative endeavors. Is it really necessary? For example, when we're talking about this, we're talking about developers potentially using things like Claude Code for, quick writing and debugging of programs. Seems perfectly reasonable use. We've seen now a lot of studies around students using these tools in their learning. And for example, using Claude Code, I saw a study about students using Claude Code. And it said that the students that used the Claude Code to write and debug didn't actually perform necessarily faster than students that didn't use it, but they weren't able to show deep understanding of the code problems following the use of the tool. They'd offloaded their cognitive process to the tool. So it's a quick solution, it's a short-term gain, but if we're thinking about the future sustainability of the game industry from that business perspective, from a kind of people and planet perspective, then, we want to be providing opportunities for new developers, students, interns to develop their coding skills. And it might mean taking a slower, more expensive option, but it increases the longevity and the sustainability of the industry in the long term. I also looked at AI at runtime. Not very common actually in the game industry. Very few commercial offerings are kind of making a big deal of AI at runtime. But it is a question as it starts to become an option, having AI in the game itself. What value is it adding to the gameplay or the user experience that our traditional game AI or deterministic programming can't already achieve? I looked at some examples, early adopter examples in the report. The most famous one is AI Dungeon. Player experiences around AI Dungeon, very negative, actually. Lots of complaints about kind of illogical and inconsistent dialogue or repetitive dialogue that turned people off from that game. A better example was Charisma AI's Kraken Wakes, which was a very small, limited release game where they used an existing story by John Wyndham, and they made an interactive narrative game based on the story, and all their dialogue was written by human programmers, narrative writers, but then they use their own conversational model to create kind of unique pathways through the game. And that was really interesting. They had some anecdotal evidence about increased user engagement with this way of like combining human written dialogue and conversational AI. What they didn't do is send the queries through to a big model. They are connected to ChatGPT, to the OpenAI models, but in the case of Kraken Wakes, they didn't send the queries through to that big cloud. They kept it within their own sort of model that they had built. And the question there is, would it have improved the game again to send the queries through to this bigger model or not? Probably not. So keeping it small, as Ben has said, is probably best. We have seen a rising backlash against AIR, AI dialogue, AI slop. In the board game industry, which we've also been researching as part of this project, it's much more marked. The kind of consumer response So we see a lot of projects on Kickstarter now putting out anti-AI statements saying we have not used AI in any portion of this game development, not in the art, not in the narrative, not in anything. And it seems to be, increasingly that consumers in that space are very negative about it. Ben's mentioned growing costs for the business as dependence on certain tool providers and subscription models might grow as you kind of increase the use of these AI tools in your workflows. And we know that some research by Nick Cernak has said that, the next step for these commercial AI tools is they need to get their return on their investment. They need to heavily commercialize. So we may see costs rise as those as return on investments are sought. So maybe quite cheap at the moment, but you could see your bills go up significantly. And obviously, the bottom line is, does this align with overall sustainability goals? If you successfully cut emissions elsewhere in your business, in your workflow, you're not flying as much, you've done some other work to cut emissions, you've worked really hard. The question is this going to undo those efforts if we unthinkingly adopt AI tools? Just on the point of risk, perceived risk, this popped up on my feed the other day about this kind of consumer or player side wariness or negativity about AI, particularly where it might replace like the creative efforts of humans in the industry. And there's a lot of support for the creative professionals in the game industry, for the artists, for the writers, and I think a kind of generally the negative view of those jobs being replaced by AI. So if you're already using AI, I mean, I speak as someone who has to use it in my workflow as an academic, as a researcher. I have to make decisions about where it's good to use it and bad to use it, where I'm cutting corners, where I have no choice because it's already part of my institutional workflow, and I kind of have to think about these things. Ben's already given some great advice, but being economical and reusing prompts, reusing assets, and not kind of spamming prompts because the inference is going to be the where we see the costs of AI energy grow. Obviously, as Ben said, if you can, using specific models before larger general purpose ones. I mean, that unfortunately for us is not what we're being sold. We're being sold general purpose models. And I think it's kind of hard to wade through and find the specific use models. But if you can, that's where the good uses of AI are going to come. Document your pipeline, see where people are using it, where the high kind of workload is for AI. Could you reduce it? Do you need to use it in all these places in the workflow? And then the big one is asking the tool providers for their sustainability data. At the moment, it's kind of entangled with big sustainability reports from the big tech companies, hard to disaggregate the data, but let them know you want to see it. It's something you'd like to know, and it's something that players, as Ben said, are going to want to know as well, as public knowledge around this increases. So I skipped one. Oh yeah. So in the research, I kind of thought there was some key conditions really that had to be met before we could, adopt AI, Gen AI in particular, for sustainable game design. I'm not going to kind of go into all of this, but the main thing is transparency. We require transparency about the environmental impacts of AI training and inference, and we need those robust life cycle accounts of the whole kind of gamut of the AI from the hardware through to the inference. We need to know that. We need to have it broken down so we can make good choices. And there's lots of claims about the kind of efficacy or kind of engagement that this might bring for your players. And we don't have any good data about that at the moment. We don't know if using AI in a game is going to bring improved player experience. There's no data about that. There's just a lot of hype. And so I think we need to see some good use cases. The training of the robots that Ben mentioned is a really interesting, like, cool little use case. We need to see more of that to understand how it can be used responsibly in game development. So key takeaways from my research anyway was demanding transparency. If you're using commercial vendor AI tools, ask them to disclose their emissions, ask them what their various costs are, ask them if they know where the data center energy mix is coming from. Say, if you don't have this information, it's the information we'd like to know as your stakeholders. We know that we should be comparing it with alternatives. So if there's a task that you're outsourcing to resource intensive AI, is it demonstrably better to use AI than to use a sort of more traditional kind of route that you've used before? Think about your scope 3 emissions. That's your kind of indirect emissions. If you're working really hard as a company to meet sustainability goals, does your proposed use of AI justify this ever-growing resource and energy use that's happening across the wider AI industry? We're kind of all implicated in that the more we adopt these tools. We have to resist the hype as well. There's a lot of hype out there about AI, and it can be hard to wade through the various studies I looked at where there's hype about efficiency, hype about engagement, hype about productivity. We have to like sift through all that to find the really good data. And the main thing is advocating for governance. It shouldn't be an individual moral responsibility, this. It should be something that's taken care of with industry-wide standards, particularly standards on those big tech companies, their environmental reporting, that we need that to be totally crystal clear. So, as we've said, and Ben has already mentioned, the reports that we've looked through and the research that we've synthesized shows that the biggest problems are opacity and hype and the hidden infrastructural impacts. And these are all produced by the platform providers, the data center operators, and the big AI model vendors. These harms are not being produced by individual game devs who are using AI in their everyday practice. So we know that it's these big systemic issues we've got to tackle. And that means that it's impossible for individual studios and individual developers to kind of tackle this alone. It's a governance issue, not a personal ethics test. And so we need to think about what collective action would look like. Combating hype through shared knowledge, through exchanges like this one, demanding those disclosures around carbon footprints and energy costs and energy mix, and supporting the industry bodies like the SGA with their kind of advocacy in terms of like improving governance on this. So I think there's a lot we can do, but we have to do it together rather than kind of
Mm, yeah,
individually. Tom, yeah, and I'll stop
absolutely.
there. Yeah.
Thanks, Chloe. So we've gone a little bit over time, but we do have some time for questions. Maybe we'll start with one that's already come through in the chat. Joseph is saying, even if AI runs on clean energy, it still has to come from somewhere, and there's a kind of opportunity cost involved with using that energy for AI. And is AI energy taking away from other essential uses? Um, I think from my understanding, um, any additional demand that is being met by non-renewables is going to also be having an impact in the rest of the energy system. And most energy grids are some form of market. Someone has to pay to produce and pay to purchase from them. It's a really complicated question, but I think probably yes, there's an opportunity cost to using renewables for AI. Um, yeah, we're not using it to charge EVs or to do other things. Again, this gets to sort of a social question around uh, how we decide to use energy and how we decide to use our scarce resources. But yeah, I think there's definitely a social cost. Another question from Samuel: what does prompt caching mean, and how do you go about that? Chloe, do you have more context for that
Yeah,
comment?
yeah. Let me address that one. So I suppose it's kind of it links to the question above actually about kind of excess prompting and prompt waste, right? So the fact that when we use these APIs, particularly chat windows, we're sending lots of prompts and we're dealing with the the last answer that came through, and then we're kind of working with that and prompting again. And this is where this kind of you see the growing energy use. So it's about like you if you send the same prompt multiple times, it repeats the same processing and increasing energy cost of that. But if you cache the prompt, then it means that, and you can ask the model to do this for you to save your prompts so that you don't have to keep resending the same prompt. So it retrieves a stored one instead of reprocessing it. So you can ask, most models will allow you to do this. It makes his responses faster and more cost effective because it's not having to redo the same process. So when you start a chat, you can kind of ask the model to set these parameters up for you and say, I want you to remember what I'm asking you, and I don't want, I want you to cache my prompts. So there's a few online articles about this that I'll post in the chat. It's just a little thing that you can do, but also you can kind of think, well, download stuff and look at what you've asked it before, and just be sensible and economical in your use. We're often kind of in these frenetic workflows, working really quickly, and it feels like it feels easy just to keep asking the AI, but it's going to be more efficient if you have a good record of what you've already asked it, and then you can use it a bit more strategically. But
Mm.
I'll pop some links in the chat.
Any other questions or comments? Maybe you have an example of your use of AI in a game workflow and just want to share about it. Like again, one of the things we're very interested in is finding out how it's already being used. Um, I think there's a lot to still be kind of explored in this space. Um, on that last kind of point that Chloe made as well, I had an experience a few weeks ago where I think I was having a problem with an Excel spreadsheet, and I was like, I could ask ChatGPT about how to solve this particular problem in the spreadsheet. And I went to it and I started typing into the prompt. And by the time I'd finished writing my prompt, um, I'd actually understood the problem more clearly. And I was like, oh, actually, I don't need to even ask it now. Um, so in that way, the sort of reflective way, it's like talking to someone else. I think that's kind of useful as well.
Yeah,
Obviously, that's not going to be every use case, but yeah.
there's a question just came in as well about integrating AI into game is going to make gaming more interactive and would most probably increase user engagement. I think that's where I think we don't have any evidence actually that that is the case. There's a lot of expectation that that's the case, but we don't have good data about user engagement, empirical data about user engagement in games. We have a lot of anecdotal data, and but we don't have like scientific robust data about what techniques produce what kinds of engagements. Um, and certainly nothing on whether AI at runtime improves engagement, whatever that might mean. We do have data about games like AI Dungeon where they were early adopters, and actually the player side experience was pretty poor. Um, so I think that again, I kind of rush to adopt and think this is going to be great, but then like not thinking through actually what is it that the players like? They like well-crafted dialogue, they like coherent narratives, they like emotionally engaging story arcs. They don't like, kind of randomness and incoherence and repetition, which is what a lot of the AI dungeon users were getting. So I think we need
Mm.
we need to see the evidence really for that. And I think AI side, AI at runtime in games, that's where we're going to see a big leap in energy emissions and energy costs for games and the emissions associated with players if that gets adopted at scale.
Mm. We are just about out of time, but one very last quick question from Mikhail. When we're talking about AI, people assume we're talking about Gen AI, but there are other subcategories like machine learning agents, like the Arc Raiders example. Should we be using more specific terms?
Yes,
Um,
yes, yes, yes.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. There's a whole thing in my report about this, and I compare traditional game AI and machine learning techniques with the cloud-based and Gen AI models, and the order of magnitude difference in terms of energy costs is huge, and actually the benefits to get game developers is negligible, really. Actually, most of what you want to do to make your games great and engaging can be done with machine learning agents, with traditional game AI, and doesn't need Gen AI at all. So yeah,
Mm.
there's a couple of tables in my report that cover that, but absolutely agreed. Yeah.
All right, well, we're going to have to wrap it up there because we are out of time. Thanks again, everyone, for coming. Just a last quick thing. If you are interested in this collective action problem, the Sustainable Games Alliance is all about solving those particular problems. So please get involved. Please reach out to us, talk to us about joining. Um, yeah. And yeah, hopefully we'll see you again soon at another exciting meetup.